Welcome, everybody, to a new Canadian Patriot podcast. And this one's going to be a little different from the sequence of interviews that people might have seen over the recent weeks in the past. However, I think it's important. And I think many people who've been following my channel, have been following this work, have noted that I've been paying over the last 2 years, especially an extraordinary amount of attention to occult machinations brewing and bubbling below the surface appearance of, what we typically call material geopolitics. I've written a series of books called Revenge of the Mystery Cults, and in increasing, there's a word that floated around that I didn't pay enough attention to for many, many years until more recently, which is eschatology. Different ideas, different ideas of end times or an end of an age or whatever, but there's an idea of a teleological future state that is defined by certain prophecies or certain patterns that is animating the unfolding of creative decision making in the present measurable moments. And again, it manifests in different ways in different cultural matrices, but there's certain common themes, common patterns that I find fascinating. And so recently I was in Calgary, and I had a wonderful conversation with Faisal after an event with Sean Newman, and I found that Faisal and I were looking at very similar things. I noticed that we have certain common ways of looking at things, certain disagreements, but point is, I really enjoyed that conversation, and in the course of inviting Faisal on today, by the way, hey, Faisal, how you doing?
Very good. How are you? Thanks for
I'm
having me
okay.
on.
My pleasure. I wanted to just, have a little bit of fun again, just fleshing out a little bit more Faisal's approach because he's a philosopher. He's spent a lot of time, many years, thinking about eschatology and how it applies to our current situation, and where we have differences in viewing things, where we have commonality in viewing these. These are things I'd like to really just, flesh out and get a better sense of. So, thank you so much for taking the time. And why don't you say before we go into the conversation, a few words about yourself? What brought you here on this path? Where are you coming from?
Yeah. So what brought me on the path started around 23 years ago, 2002, 2003 is when I started embarking on this journey of discovery and understanding. And I actually started in the subject matter that you said you've recently been getting into, which is the occult, the esoteric stuff, secret societies, etc. Now, before I go too far into that, just a bit of background by way of myself, so viewers can get an understanding of who they're listening to. I was born and raised here in Canada, in Toronto. I don't live in Toronto; I'm on the outskirts of Toronto now. But born to immigrant parents, all the way back in 1974. So I don't know what that makes me, Gen X or something. But I'm 51, and I studied engineering, so I had a very sort of rational, scientific, educational background. I grew up in a Muslim household, which is where my exposure to what Islam had to teach started from. But my dad is the one who taught it to me. He had a very liberal, open-minded, pragmatic interpretation of Islam, which is really what stuck with me. But he never got into eschatology or anything like that. And so eventually I left home to go off to undergrad and turn into my own self, become an adult or whatever. So I left behind all that religious stuff because it was kind of stuff that we did at home and that was an obligation imposed upon us by my dad, right? But it wasn't until my dad passed away in 2008 that I came back to it. It was just a thing of like, who was my dad? What was he all about? Let me understand a little bit more about him. This religion was so important to him. He taught us this stuff when I was growing up. So let's take a look back at it again. Lo and behold, I stumble into a major aspect of Islam. I would say the Quran really is, Quran being the holy book of Islam. If I had to stab a guess at it, it's like 50% eschatology, really. And that then started to mesh in with some of the other stuff that I was reading about, which was the secret society stuff. And it really got super fascinating. Now, how did I get into the secret society stuff? I had gone and done my business degree, MBA, in France. So I lived in Paris in the 6th arrondissement, right there by what's the church called? Saint-Sulpice, I think, is the name of the church. And Saint-Sulpice shows up in a book, a fictional book by Dan Brown, The Da Vinci Code, right? So, anyways, I read this Da Vinci Code thing when I'm on an airplane at one point on a business trip, and this is just after I finished my MBA. And it starts to fascinate me because that book gets into some of this esoteric secret society stuff in the City of London. And I did an internship in London during my MBA. I was in an investment bank. I worked for the debt house at the time. It was a strictly debt house, Barclays Capital.
Hmm.
It talks about various landmarks and this and that in London. And so I realized that I'm reading a book of fiction here. What's the real inspirational material behind this story? I discovered Dan Brown didn't just make it all up. There was Holy
You went
Blood, Holy Grail.
right, Michel Bagnon and
Yeah,
right.
exactly. And I can't remember who the other gentleman was. There's two authors, I think, right? So I ended up buying Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and it's on my bookshelf outside. If you come visit, then you'll see it sitting there.
Yeah, I've got one as well. I'm looking through
Did
my
you
books
get
here. Right? Yeah.
did you get through it entirely?
Yeah.
It is such a dry, heavy
Yeah.
read,
Yeah.
but I forced my way through it, and I just really wanted to understand, where does this crap come from? And then, of course, on subsequent visits back to Paris and to London, because I had friends in both places following the MBA, I went and I investigated, like, how much of this stuff is actual BS that Dan Brown made up in terms of the landmarks and the rose line on the ground and this and that. And lo and behold, it was all there. Stuff that I was totally ignorant and blind to when I was living in it, right? It had to
Mm.
be pointed out to begin to see it. So, anyways, that began to really fascinate me. But I ended up feeling like it was just a rabbit hole where I was chasing my own tail. And I wonder if it's intentionally presented in a way that you can't, really make sense of it very easily. And so I exited that rabbit hole after a few years of getting into it, and I got into stuff like, well, obviously the Rosicrucians, the Templar story, the Freemasons, well, Masons that turned into Freemasonry, the Hiram Key in terms of the architectural design behind Solomon's Temple, blah, 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 blah. I got so dizzy chasing my own tail, trying to make sense of it, that I backed out of that stuff. And then my father passed away, etc. I came back to the Islam stuff and the eschatology. I was like, wait a second, this stuff really links up. And I wonder if the secret society work, whatever they get up to, isn't really a matter of hijacking Abrahamic scripture to their own advantages. And that sort of just resided in the back of my head, doing nothing, collecting dust, until recently I had a bit of an epiphany moment. And so recently, being all the way, fast forward all the way to 2024, so the beginning of last year, on vacation with my wife. We were in Vietnam. She was busy doing something. I was waiting for her on the beach. I think we were getting ready to go out for dinner. And I was like I always do, I just get up inside my head and deep in thought or whatever, right? So I'm sitting there waiting for her, and an aha moment goes off, a eureka moment. Whether it was valid or not, it felt like an epiphany. And I was like, what had happened was October 7th, 2023, the incident, the events between Gaza and Israel, Hamas, you're right, I think it was October 7th.
It was.
Shortly thereafter, Elon Musk gets owner of Twitter at this point, right? X, call it what you want, gets led by the nose. I think it was early December 23 to Israel. Later gets led by the nose a second time to do the tour of the concentration camps, the Holocaust memorials, etc., in Germany. Okay.
Right.
And, at face value, I would have thought that he's being led by the nose because, okay, this stuff has gone on in Israel with Hamas, etc. You would think that the owner of perhaps the largest social media platform in the world was being schooled and educated on the fact that, You got to be on the side of Israel. You got to make sure that anti-Semitism doesn't go, it doesn't amplify, right? But actually, what happened by my observations, and I don't know how these algorithms work, but maybe it's just an algorithmic thing, but other people have echoed it now as well, that anti-Semitism just exploded online in a way that I never imagined I would witness in my life, because growing up for 50 years in the West, there was always firm guardians stationed at the gates of anti-Semitism saying, "Thou shalt not enter here," right? But all of a sudden it started flying rampantly. And that was the epiphany. It's like, if this, then why? Oh, maybe it's intentional. Maybe it's by design. Maybe they want to engender the hate against Israel, against the Jews. And that linked up with something I remember reading about eschatology. And then it was like just the aha kaboom moment for myself, where I then got really deep into thought. And eventually, and our mutual friend, Alex Craner, he encouraged me, you need to write a book, Faisal, you need to write a book. And I said, I'm not a book writer. That's not, I'm an engineer by education. I like to think, but I'm not, I can write well, but I'm not somebody who's going to sit down and write a book. But then I thought, okay, I need to at least put it into writing, something that's got a timestamp. So on my Twitter page and my pinned tweet, I laid out this whole whatever thesis. It's a 10 page, about a half hour read, maybe 20 to 30 minute read. And I'm glad I got it out there because A, it's got the timestamp. B, it's something to look back on and reflect upon. But in getting into this subject matter of eschatology, I didn't confine myself to Islamic eschatology alone. Now, I can't call myself an expert in Christian eschatology or Jewish eschatology, because I'm using the scriptures of those religions more as a cross reference to help understand, to create breadth and depth of my understanding of what Islamic eschatology has to teach. But I did get into the Torah. I did read the Bible way back in the past. And so anyways, it triggered this memory for me from Jewish eschatology that the Jewish Messiah doesn't arrive unless and until Israel, the land and its people, go through a redemption process till they're redeemed. And that sets the stage then for the return, or it's not the return, for the arrival of the Jewish Messiah, right? And then, I started cross-referencing that with stuff I observed in current affairs with Benjamin Netanyahu and his, mentor who died in 1994. The Rabbi Mendel Schneerson. I can't remember exactly how, but Schneerson anyway.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. The Rebbe.
The Rebbe, yeah, exactly. And Schneerson, and he was only the fourth head of the Chabad movement within Judaism, which is, I believe, a highly orthodox take on Judaism. And he would tell Netanyahu that he would be instrumental. He almost was giving a prophecy, right, to Netanyahu, saying, Netanyahu, you will one day rise to the leadership of this nation of Israel, and you will be instrumental in setting the stage, paving the path for the arrival of our Messiah.
Yeah, I think, in post-production, I'll splice in a little clip it from 1991 where people can actually see it. It'll be more visceral. The Rebbe actually firstly chastising that he's not going fast enough, but pretty much giving him the instruction.
What is the status of the project, sort of thing? And
we'll just splice that in right here.
Yeah.
Go on.
And then Netanyahu says what he says. I can't remember verbatim, but it's like, I'm working on it. Trust me, I'm getting there. I'm working on it. Right? And then you shared with me recently the first chapter of your most recent book that you're putting together, or is it done already?
Yeah, no, it's here. Yeah, it's
done already.
Babylon, the Age of Aquarius. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, with the black sun dropping onto the hippies.
Yeah. So, within the first chapter, and maybe you get into it a little bit more later on in the book. I haven't read the whole book, just the chapter that you sent me the link to. about what's his name, Kissinger, right? And back in 2012, saying what he said about, in I think at that time he said it 10 years time there won't be in Israel, right?
Yeah.
Now, he didn't nail it obviously because Israel is still there, but what did he mean by it? One has to wonder. And you bring it back to all this eschatology stuff and what Netanyahu is clearly working on.
Mm.
And of course, this even got further amplified when you had all that red heifer stuff in the news about a year and a half, 2 years ago. You remember that?
I do. Yeah, they brought in the red heifers. What they might have been even genetically modified to be like perfectly
They
red. I'm
were.
not. Yeah,
They
they were,
were
right?
in Texas.
Yeah.
There was a rancher in Texas who said, "Listen, I'm hyper Christian Zionist. Let's make this happen. We can do it." And I don't know what loopholes they jump through in their minds to make it to validate genetic engineering to get the red heifer. But being very clever people, they didn't make one, they made five because God forbid the one should die and then you got to go back to the drawing board. So, anyways, long story short, this red heifer stuff hits the news, the altar, and this was not just like, some random news reporting site. It was on CBC News on their website. I clipped it and I think I even tweeted it out going, holy crap, what the heck is going on? Maybe this thesis of mine is actually, onto something.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's there's a lot of stuff I just barfed out
No, that's good.
onto the
That's good.
podcast. We probably need to try and connect some of these dots now.
No, that's really good. It's good to start with that broader scaffold. I'm just going to show a screenshot here, quickly to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah,
Well, so you brought up Kissinger.
yeah,
Now Kissinger, as I pointed out, was made a Knight of the Order of Saint George and Saint Michael by
okay,
Her Majesty the Queen back in 1992.
okay,
And the Order of Saint George and Saint Michael, I mean, these are the two archangels that are typically portrayed as killing a dragon. George on a horse usually, but Saint Michael, with the spear, killing a serpent or a dragon. Typical thing.
yeah.
There's something, I don't know if you've seen this before. The Apollo Saint Michael axis. Have you seen this diagram?
Not in particular, but I remember coming across this through some of my reading in the past.
It ends here on Mount Carmel and Megiddo, where the Battle of Armageddon is professed to exist. And what's
Yeah,
interesting is that starting in around the 7th century or 8th century, a series of churches were built, starting with the apex being on Skellig Michael,
right.
moving down to St. Michael's
Saint
Mount,
Michel,
Mount St. Michel,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
Bourges Cathedral, Cluny Cathedral, which is also devoted to St. Michael, Monte
Mhm.
Gargano, which is where uh, Benedict, I think, had his revelation in a cave. They built this whole thing around. Oh no, Monte Gargano was the first. Yeah, that was. Sorry, scratch what I just said. That was the first ever church to Saint Michael. It still exists. Been
Okay.
added on to. Then you got Delphi, the Apollo, the
Corfu.
Oracle. Yeah.
I went to the one in Corfu. I went to the one in Delphi. I've been to Mont Saint Michel,
Okay.
uh, and I've been to the one in Rhodes. Yeah,
So that's interesting, right? And the fact that it would end right there at that particular, hot
yeah,
spot.
yeah.
What does that make you? What has this cropped up? This Saint Michael, Saint George sort of imagery? Because this thing exists before Saint Michael and Saint George. As we can see, there's already like these ancient oracle sites along this axis. I think it's where the sun is at its apex on the solstice.
Mhm.
Um, but so this is like an older idea that preceded, even as far as I could tell, the emergence of Christianity, Islam, but it's already been in play. What does this make you think of, or what is this? How does this play into your thesis so far of eschatology?
Yeah, I don't, to be honest, I don't really know what to make of it. I don't know
Okay,
enough about what Saint Michael represents, and so
okay,
why this line of churches, etc.,
okay.
would be named after him. I can't make much of it. The thing about Armageddon, of course, ties directly into the eschatology.
Mm,
And one of the things I've come to appreciate and understand is that uh, scripture has been played with a lot, all three
mm,
scriptures, Jewish scripture, Christian, and Muslim scripture. Muslim scripture is very difficult to really screw around with and change. and I can explain why
Yeah,
that
why?
is the case. But in screwing around with the scripture, one of our misunderstandings is what is Armageddon. So Armageddon is supposed to be the great battle that takes place. So authentically, the authentic meaning of my understanding of the authentic meaning of Armageddon is that the battle of Armageddon, is the battle in which Christ actually, the real Messiah, Christ defeats the false Messiah, that purported Messiah who falsely claims himself to be Christ. How it's been twisted is that we believe the Great War, what in Islamic eschatology is called the Mulhama, what we're thinking of as World War III, is Armageddon. And so the thesis, did you get a chance to read the PDF that I sent you?
I did indeed. Yeah, I
Okay.
did. Yeah.
So my thesis really is, what it's trying to get at is there's a grand psyop that's taking place, and it's probably been taking place for a very long time. We're, we're about to harvest the fruit of that psyop, which is to dupe humanity into believing, accepting the false Messiah as the actual Messiah. They're doing their work. Whoever is behind this is doing the work to make sure that they succeed in duping as many people as possible. Because how could they pull it off? And I don't want to call it the Jews, because Judaism, in my opinion, is a religion that's been hijacked by these ne'er-do-good people. But, if the Jewish Messiah is going to come and is going to be presented as the real Messiah, how do you get half the world's population? And what do I say half? Because you've got something like 2 billion Christians, another something like 2 billion Muslims, 4 billion out of 8 billion humans on the planet have been taught to expect a false Messiah before the real Messiah.
Yeah.
Right? So the first Messiah that rolls along is going to get rejected. So what psyop do you need to pull off? How do you need to change the understanding of what Scripture teaches in order to accomplish, what you're up to, accomplish the psyop, successfully pull it off? So that's where the idea of a decoy false Messiah comes from in my thesis. And that's where my appreciation of the twisting of the understanding of Armageddon comes from. Because if Armageddon must precede the arrival of the Messiah, who's going to falsely claim himself to be Jesus Christ, then you have to have the war and then reveal the fake Christ, right? Who they want us to believe is the real Christ. But then, because God has warned us through Scripture, if you F around, you're going to find out one day, right? So it's up to God whenever he decides that he's going to send Christ back. That's not up to our free will. Our free will allows us to F around, right?
Yeah.
And come up with a false Messiah. So if what Scripture teaches is true, like authentic scriptural interpretation teaches that it is the battle of Armageddon in which Christ defeats the false Messiah, then you begin to understand that there's a fractal nature to what's taking place here. The psyop is a self-similar human, synthetically generated human end times narrative that is intended to mirror the actual end times scripture. What actual end times
So you
scripture
were
has to
saying
be.
that there's sort of two processes unfolding. One is sort of a doppelganger of the other, the one being more genuine as an eschatological moment or event, and then the other
Yes.
one being manufactured by human agency,
Yes.
with no connection necessarily to the more real one, is what you're saying?
I wouldn't say that there's no connection. I think the connection is that the real one, The real one motivates the doppelganger.
Is the doppelganger necessary to bring in or actualize the real one, or is it two disconnected things? Could the human agency one have not existed for the other one, the more real one in your mind, to manifest?
I would say no. I think you have to have the doppelganger one for the real one to come, because it's really the ultimate
Yeah.
human, if I may swear on your podcast, it's
Go
the
ahead.
ultimate human fuckery,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, of all the stupid things that humans can get up to exercising their free will in a bad way, in a negative way, the most extreme is to take the image of Christ and say, look, we've created our own, and you have to believe that he's the real one. Because when they get us to believe and accept and embrace the fake one, they get to then impose on us what Abrahamic scripture teaches, which is Pax Christi, the kingdom of Christ, where the world, falls under, call it one world government, but one world government in the most positive, peaceful, prosperous, enlightened. This is what God promises us with the return of the Messiah, right?
Yeah.
So if you're up to no good and you go, well, I really like the end product. What if I just hijack this whole thing and present it to humanity, and then I have my one world kingdom that people embrace? I don't need to force it upon them. I deceive them into embracing it and accepting it.
Yeah. Well, so for me, I do want to get into your actual the writings that you put out in the form of those Twitter messages in 2024. But I guess the paradox here is, if you have an oligarchical sort of satanic agency which has actualized that level of political power projection and control over a world government, is it even possible to have peace and prosperity, or is that an illusion? It strikes me that empires always need to divide to conquer and make people the worst part of themselves in order to
Yeah,
self-manage. So is it even
100%.
possible to have the ideals of prosperity
Well,
actualized if they do that? Yeah.
that's why in Christian eschatology, it warns of the era of the Antichrist lasts 7 years. Now, I don't know if you're supposed to take that as a literal 7 years or not. I'll leave it up to the scholars of the Bible to teach me what that actually is supposed to mean. But if you let's just take it at face value. What it's saying is it's supposed to last 7 years, 3.5 of which will be glorious and wonderful. And that is the psyop. And then he flips the script on humanity, the Antichrist does. So coming back to your point.
Right.
Right.
Then it gets dark. So
Yeah.
in your essay, I'll call it an essay, for lack of a better
Sure.
word, but
Sure.
you make the point of, and I think you're inspired largely by some of the considerations of Sheikh Imam Hussein, I believe, is sort of
Sheikh Imran Hussein is
your
the person who
consideration.
made. Yeah,
Yeah.
when I said that I got back into Islam, and lo and behold, sort of stumbled into this eschatological side of Islam, it was because of some lectures of Sheikh Imran's that I'd listened to. I've been in touch with him. I helped him publish his last book, get it out more quickly. I mean, it was a financial thing. I didn't do any writing or researching. I was just
Yeah.
like, what's taking so long, man? He's like, well, I need to raise this much money in order to run the first print. I'm like, that doesn't sound like a lot. Let's just make it happen. So
Okay, cool.
that's the assistance that I provided. And the reason I was impatient is because it's all happening in real time, and that book needed to get out.
Right.
So, but yeah, Sheikh Imran Hussein. Exactly.
Okay, and in it, so there's the imagery of Gog and Magog that play a prominent role.
Yeah.
The concept of also two false messiahs, a greater and a lesser, play a role.
That's
And I'm
not from
curious.
Sheikh Imran.
Oh, that's
That
not. Oh, okay.
No, that is me. That's my contribution to the eschatological discussion,
Okay.
because So Shake and Run takes it very literal from well, I shouldn't say literal, but his interpretation of the Quran, because the Quran doesn't present anything about a decoy of a false Messiah.
Okay.
This is me saying, well, if they're going to pull it off, they're not going to pull it off by presenting it to us, because there's, 2 billion Muslims and 2 billion Christians who are waiting to say, you are the false Messiah. I reject you. Right. So you got to float a decoy in front of them first. Now, where does the idea of the lesser Messiah and what I call the minor Messiah and the major Messiah come from? That comes from Jewish eschatology.
And these are both false messiahs, or are these legit messiahs in your studies of Jewish?
So, in the minds of the Jewish people who do believe in the minor and the major Messiah, minor and major again are my language. They just call him Messiah ben Joseph and then Messiah ben David. So Messiah from the lineage of, or a minor Messiah figure that resembles the Joseph figure in biblical history, and then the Messiah that's supposed to come from the lineage of David, the real Jewish Messiah. In my opinion, both are not the right Messiah. I think the idea of a minor Messiah and a major Messiah goes back to what I said about the twisting of Scripture, because what the Jews were actually told, what was prophesied to them when they were, and I shouldn't call them the Jews, I should stick with my terminology. They were the Israelites until the era of Christ. And then the Israelites bifurcated into two streams, Judaism and Christianity. So when they were captive in Babylon, what they were told was they were going to be delivered a Messiah twice. Once as a persecuted individual who struggled with them, who would then later again be sent to them in triumph. Now, putting yourself, being a little empathetic with these Jews who are held in captivity, having gone through, all sorts of pogroms over history, and like, woe be I, woe be I, woe be I. When Jesus came along, right, back in 2000 or so years ago, a faction of them rejected him because they were waiting for their, whatever God had promised them. The peace, the prosperity, the whatever they were promised. And lo and behold, they look at this lowly carpenter who's not able to deliver any of that to them. And so they rejected him. And I believe that there is a faction within Judaism that understands the error of their ways. They then concocted this idea of, well, it's not one guy who comes twice, it's two different guys. Okay. The Messiah ben Joseph and then the Messiah ben David. And I believe both are, by necessity, have to be whatever false messiahs. Okay. Obviously, neither one of those are Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And their relationship in your mind, in your model, to the Antichrist, what would that be?
So I believe that whoever is going to get put in front of us, whoever the Jews are going to accept as the Messiah ben David, Messiah ben David, the major Messiah, I believe that is the actual Antichrist. Okay. Whoever they end up recognizing, because we haven't gotten to that stage yet, whoever they end up recognizing as their Messiah ben Joseph, I'm saying is a decoy of the false Messiah, such that the Christians and the Muslims in the room can be duped, so that they have someone to point to and say, aha, j'accuse, you are the false Messiah, I therefore reject thee. And then their pump is primed to accept whoever gets floated down in front of them. Now, in the course of this all, I do believe that the Jews get thrown under the bus, because how does the false Messiah come down and say, I am Jesus Christ, and Judaism is built on the rejection of Christ, right? So I think part of the exercise is Jews getting thrown under the bus, in the sense that they have to go, oh crap, we were wrong all this time, it was you. Sorry, man, sorry, but here you are, your peaceful, loving, forgiving self, we are redeemed, etc. And And then you get your what I call Pax Judaica. And Pax Judaica is what I believe is being constructed by humans with the intent of usurping what God promises, which I call Pax Christi.
Mm, okay. I'm just going to quickly read something here from a figure who came up in the text that I shared with you. That sort of, in certain degrees, I think, substantiates some of what you had been bringing up. And there's a guy named George Pember that I
Okay.
began reading going into this research a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
and discovered that he's a highly influential figure from the Plymouth Brethren, the exclusive Plymouth Brethren that was set up by John Nelson Darby.
Yep.
Um,
The
and
same
for those
Darby of what's it called? Dispensationalism, right?
guy who crafted, yeah, that interpretation of premillennial dispensationalism, yeah, that guy.
Yeah.
Um, and this whole Plymouth Brethren thing, it's interesting because that's also the sect that Aleister Crowley was born
Yep.
into.
Yep.
And Aleister Crowley, till the end of his days, would continuously extol the virtues of John Nelson Darby and Nelson Darby's theology, which is just an interesting anomaly. He just says that I took the other side. You know, he's like,
Yeah.
now the thing that caught my eye in this figure, Pember's work on the Antichrist Babylon and the coming kingdom, he writes, the wonder is that the restoration of Babylon has never yet been attempted. As soon, however, as Christendom is united in the form of the 10 confederate kingdoms, all jealousy will be at an end, and the great prize may then be seized for the common good. Whatever that means. I shudder to think of what the common good means for him, but
Yeah.
no doubt
Right.
commerce will be the exciting motive. The civilized world will perhaps combine to build a great central emporium, which by their united exertion will quickly surpass all other cities and finally become the capital of the Antichrist. You're like, it sounds pretty good until the very end. You're like, what?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
What?
What? What twist?
And then if you
Right.
look down like what he was a part of, this guy was working with the networks of Herzl. He was working with the networks of Palmerston, of Shaftesbury, that was creating. And
Yeah.
all of these guys, ultimately, when you read the writings, they really don't like Jews. They really despise
Yeah.
Jews.
Yeah.
However,
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
obsessed with creating this greater Israel from the river to the Euphrates, which looks a
Yep.
lot like Babylon's contour under Nebuchadnezzar in terms of the geographical areas are very
Yep.
similar.
Yep.
So kind of falls in alignment a little bit with what you've been observing, that there is this strange idea of artificially creating this outcome in order to bring in like
Yeah.
almost in a ritualistic or an invocation of the
Yeah.
Antichrist. Like,
Yeah. So that's, and so I call it Pax Judaica. You could call it the New Babylon. Um, yeah, I mean, depending on which direction you're coming at it from, I call it Pax Judaica because I'm coming at it from the vector of Islamic eschatology, right? If you come at it through the secret societies, esoteric type stuff, you might end up labeling it New Babylon, right?
mm,
But I believe it's one and the same thing.
okay.
Yeah.
And you make the point that Gog and Magog play a very important role. What is Gog and Magog in your eschatology? And there's so many different interpretations and debates and
Yeah.
disputes.
Yeah.
And we didn't even go into who you think might be the greater and lesser, which we'll maybe touch on, maybe perhaps. But
Yeah.
Gog and Magog, what are they in your mind, in your interpretation, and what role does this play in the unfolding of these events?
Right. So I told you how I got caught spinning around in circles, chasing my own tail when I went down the rabbit hole of secret societies and stuff. I'm not perhaps the best scholar in the world, and so that's why I got dizzy. So I'll leave it up to people like yourselves who are much more scholarly minded to figure it out. But I sort of take all of that messy Western society, secret society crap, and I call it Gog and Magog.
Okay.
And so
right.
Gog and Magog,
the whole kit and caboodle of all the esoteric complexity
yeah,
and all that nastiness is just one. Okay, that's okay.
yeah.
That's good.
And I really hope that one day I'll be able to understand the structure and this and that and whatever. But I think that's a ways off still. I think there's a lot of unraveling that's still going on. But at any rate, Gog and Magog are human beings. They're not like whatever spirits or this or that or whatever, right? So in the grand hierarchy of this, spiritual negativity that exists in our universe, in our existence. You've got the big boss would be Satan. One of his lead henchmen would be the Antichrist, who is an interdimensional being. And then the human minions of the Antichrist would be these Gog and Magog, the people, the human beings that tap into the other world. And goodness knows what they come up with, what messages they're given, or what inspirations they believe they've received through this satanic worship type stuff.
So kind of like Sauron and the evil wizards with the orcs and then their human minion sort
Yeah,
of
that kind of
followers,
thing.
that kind of
Yeah,
thing. Okay. All right.
yeah, that kind of thing, right? So these guys are these Gog and Magog guys, these humans. They're in effect carrying out the will of Satan through, his various machinations and their whatever, however he's deceiving them, et cetera, right? And what does, the story of Satan, which Christianity calls as fallen angel, Islam clarifies it wasn't an angel because angels don't have free will. Angels
Mm,
can only do good. So,
mm,
but the creatures that God has created, the sentient creatures that God created are the angels, what Islam calls the jinn, and human beings. Okay. So angels are of pure energy, a very, very high frequency form of energy, call it light energy. Okay. Jinn are energy free of any matter whatsoever, of a lower frequency. So call it like heat energy, maybe, lower frequency. Um, but the difference between angels and jinn is that jinn have free will. They can follow the teachings of God, the good messages that God imparts on us. But angels can't. They have no free will. They can only do good. So in this, and then of course you've got humans, which are made of matter, and we also have free will. We can do good or we can do bad. So um, one of these jinn, who was an exceptionally, impressive specimen of a jinn, was elevated to exist within the circle of the angels that served God. He was such an impressive specimen of jinn. But boy, did he have an ego on him. And when God said to to the angels and the jinn, now look at what I've created. I've created human beings, the greatest of all my creations, right? This is where the story of the fallen angel in Christianity, or the fallen, super jinn in Islam comes from, where it's like he took it upon himself. We call him Satan, or in Islam, his name is Iblis. Um, he took it upon himself to say, no, there's no way that these things that you've created, these fleshy, meat sacks, are superior to me. I have taken upon myself, therefore, by the end of time, to prove to you, God, that I am superior. And so, really, what the story of Satan is all about is to dominate and oppress humans and trick us into serving this satanic system of beliefs, the satanic egomaniacal system, in order that Iblis or Satan may one day turn to God and see, told you I'd do it. I am superior. These guys suck. It's like, look, I fooled them. And they're so easily manipulatable that I fool them into, I used your blessings on them. I weaponized your blessings, God, on them, meaning Christ and Pax Christi, which is promised, against them. And they fell for it because they're greedy, they're hungry, they're whatever, whatever, whatever. And they fell for it. And look, they're all under my thumb and my command. So Satan's at the head of that hierarchy. Then you've got his henchman, also a jinn, the Antichrist. And then you've got, or what Islam calls Dajjal. Dajjal is Antichrist. And then you've got the human minions, Gog and Magog. Okay. And so end times in Islam really started at the end of the Prophet Muhammad's life. Okay. So the story of Gog and Magog in the Quran is that they were a group of warring people
Mhm.
um, who whose MO was always to oppress the people around them, and they would descend down into the area that we would today call, I guess, northern Iran, Azerbaijan, Armenia. They would descend down into that area, rape and pillage, oppress and dominate the people there. Along comes this character in history. Who exactly was that person? You know, it can be debated. But his title, not his name, his title was Dhul Qarnayn. And Dhul Qarnayn in Arabic means of two epochs, of two eras. Okay.
And he's the one you mentioned in Islamic texts reined in Gog and Magog, like put a.
Exactly. So he was a traveler. He traveled around. He on part of his travels, he comes across these people who are like, "You seem like a good guy and a capable guy. Can you help us?" What do you mean? Well, there's this warring tribe that descends across the mountains through these mountains over here, and they, rape and pillage or whatever, and then off they go. And every so often they return. Just as we get back up on our 2 feet, the hordes come again. And long story short, we can deduce from the scripture and the interpretation of the scripture that they were descending through the one and only pass that exists, mountain pass that exists in the mountain range that connects from the Black Sea to the Caspian Sea. Okay. So that would be in Georgia. The gorge, the pass that they're passing through is called the Darial Gorge, right? That's, how scientists or whatever scholars have tried to figure out what the heck is this real or is this not real. And it seems there's sufficient reason to say, well, it's quite possible that this was the area. At any rate, if you accept that interpretation, then what Islamic eschatology is teaching is that you being humanity will witness the second iteration of Dhul Qarnayn. It's not like Jesus, where it's the same man twice. It's just another guy, call it doppelganger again, of the first guy who comes about, and you will recognize Dhul Qarnayn. This is what Islam teaches. You will recognize Dhul Qarnayn because he will rise to power in the region of the Black Sea on a foundation of tremendous faith in the one true God, and he will make it his work and his effort to relieve the oppressed, the people who are being oppressed and dominated by Gog and Magog. Okay. So
Okay.
now, who might Gog and Magog be? You remember I just said a couple minutes ago that end times really started at the end of the Prophet Muhammad's life, according to Islamic eschatology.
And just quick, that was around 6:30. You were saying, right, about that time?
About 6:30, because I think he passed away
Okay.
6:32.
Okay. And Dhul Qarnayn, is this somebody who precedes the life of Muhammad, or is
Yes,
contemporary, or came after?
the first iteration would precede the
So
Prophet
he
Muhammad.
came in. Okay, he existed as a person before Muhammad was born.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Because as the Prophet Muhammad is receiving these revelations, the God par- so parlays this story of Dhul-Qarnayn, not as in this is going to happen, but as in it happened once. I'm reporting it to you,
Okay.
but it's going to happen a second time.
And to put a bit of meat on the bones, do we have an idea of what that looked like politically, who that was, or how that person manifested in recorded history, or is that not something that's been preserved in
Well, some people argue, a lot of Muslim scholars like to argue that it was Alexander the Great.
Okay.
Doesn't really totally fit. It's kind of square peg, round hole, but if you hit it hard enough, you can get it to fit.
Okay.
It feels like a rather amateurish sort of schoolboy interpretation or explanation. So I don't buy that it's Alexander the Great, but whoever it was, the story is that he helps these oppressed people in that region just south of the Caucasus Mountains. And what he does is he builds this great wall to block off the Darial Gorge. He says,
Okay.
I don't need you to pay me or anything like this. I just need the help of your labor because I'm just one guy and a horse. So help me out. And they build this pass. They build this wall across the pass, and Gog and Magog are no longer able to come down and do their nastiness, right?
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
they're very thankful and whatever. And it's like, thank you for saving us from this oppression. But we're told or taught through Islam to expect a very similar character to emerge again. And we'll recognize him because he will emerge in the region of the Black Sea, and he will fight against Gog and Magog. He doesn't defeat them and kill them. The best he can accomplish is to contain them and buy us some time, as it were. Okay. So
yeah.
Prophet Muhammad, close to the end of his life, call it 630. I might be wrong. Could have been 629. It could have been 631. Who knows exactly, right? But he has this nightmare, and he wakes up shaking and shivering, and his wife, who was in the room with him or whatever, so what happened? What's wrong? He's had this horrible dream. Gog and Magog have broken through the wall that was built, right? Which is probably not literal, but is to be interpreted as God has allowed them to run rampant again. In other words, God is saying, okay, you know what? You humans have effed around for so long. That's it. I'm kicking off the end times process. But the end times process is very much like that. That Greek song Zorba the Greek?
I do. Yes.
Starts off very slowly, and then it crescendos and the
Yeah.
tempo picks up. End times, in my mind, because my dad used to love that song and he played on the vinyl every Sunday morning, Zorba the Greek. It reminds me of Zorba the Greek. My understanding of end times starts off slow, crescendos, and then just gets really high tempo. And we're at the very high tempo, rather loud conclusion of Zorba the Greek right now. So end times isn't an event; it's a process, and it isn't the end of time. Like, we're not all about to die and go off to heaven. My understanding, what I teach other people who want to understand what rattles around in my head, is that it is the flip, and the end times is a process that can be thought of as the flipping of the last page of the penultimate chapter in a very long book called Human History. What lies in the last chapter, we have a clue about, Pax Christi. It's going to be wonderful. How long is that chapter? I don't think we can really conclusively say. Certainly Islamic eschatology doesn't say it's going to last exactly 1,000 years or exactly 100 years or exactly 1 billion years. So I don't know how long it's going to last, how thick of a chapter it is, but I know it's going to be a great chapter. And I know that because we're going through this chaotic, dark end times process, it's going to get worse before it gets better. But the greatness which is to come, which has been promised and prophesied to us, is really not that far off in the grand scheme of human history. Like, how long have humans been around? Written history is, I mean, you might be able to answer, you might be able to pull out a number better than I can, but it's a few thousand years, right? So in the grand scheme of however long humans have been around, this Pax Christi era is not, in my opinion, it's not too far off. Does it take 10 years? Does it take 100 years? I can't
Yeah.
really say, but
Well, yeah.
my gut says it's way closer
I think that it gets
than today.
destructive when people start putting an inordinate amount of unknowable detail onto the body of the thing. I think when you keep the concept as a concept, it's a lot more constructive. You could play with it a lot more. There's a lot more space for creative change. But when people start going a la Darby, and start giving very
Yeah.
exact, Kabbalistic numerological sort of numbers that they impose onto your interpretation of the thing,
Yeah.
then things get weird. They get a little George Bushy. I got a quote
They
from George
do, but
Bush.
those Kabbalistic numerological
Yeah.
things are important to pay attention to. Just because
Yeah.
we don't believe in it, they believe in it.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
And
listen to this.
because they believe
I
in
got a
it,
thing from
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
so
Sorry.
yeah, they absolutely. Whether this is right or wrong, the fact is that people who have power and influence believe it and make things happen according to those parameters and astrological phenomenon for sure. Yeah. And
Yeah,
there's a quote from George Bush somebody just sent me the other day and I wrote it down where
yeah.
I was reminded he was speaking of Jacques Chirac and he said, Jacques, you and I share a common faith. You're Roman Catholic, I'm Methodist, but we're both Christians committed to the teachings of the Bible. I don't do a good George Bush
You're right. Right.
voice. I'm sorry. We share one common Lord. Sounds good so far. Okay. Next up, Gog and Magog are at work in the Middle East. Biblical prophecies are being fulfilled. This confrontation
Jesus.
is willed by God, who wants to use this conflict to erase his people's enemies before a new age begins. It was like 2003. George Bush Jr.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. What? So was that
No,
in a public setting that he said that? It must have
it
been.
was in a
Otherwise, how
speech called
else?
the first 500 days of George Bush's, I
Oh,
guess. So it's called the 500 days.
is that in
Uh,
your latest book somewhere? I have to buy
no,
that book.
somebody just sent it to me 48 hours ago, and I
Oh, 48
scribbled it
hours
down
ago.
in my
Oh, wow.
little occult
Little notebook.
notebook here, where I keep fucked up quotes.
Yeah.
Um,
You're gonna have to work that into edition 2 of your latest book.
well, I'm working on volume 4 because I got 3 volumes published. I'm working on volume 4 right now.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
volume 4 is gonna go more into the UFO psyop of things because
Yeah,
the whole UFO thing isn't really about UFOs. It's about I'm trying to build in my thesis that they're trying to create a new reset of world religions around the idea that all of the sacred characters of everybody's religions, whether Hindu or Buddhist or
yeah,
Christian or Muslim,
yeah.
everything was actually UFOs the whole time, and ETs interfacing with humans, often through drugs. And that's sort
Right.
of the remix they
Yeah,
want to sort of nudge us all towards. So I'm going to do that
right.
in volume 4.
Cool.
Um, but in your thing, you make a point that Gog and Magog have 3 sort of phases, I guess you could say, in terms
The
of the recent
Antichrist has
era.
3 phases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you got
So Gog
the
and Magog,
did you go, yeah.
right?
Oh, before that, let me set that up with an image here, because I
Yeah.
did. It's that concept is something I've been encountering more and more, and I'm just gonna show this little image quickly to just punctuate something that caught my attention a few months back. Can you see my screen there?
Yes, this was what I was telling you about in Calgary.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah,
you got me on this, and then
yeah,
I started looking into it, and sure enough, for those who
yeah.
don't know what we're looking, or do you want to introduce what we're looking at here?
Yeah, so these are effigies of Gog and Magog. They exist. They're real. They stand in the what's it called? It's not. Is it Lord Mayor's
Yeah,
house or yeah?
something like there's another name for it, but yeah, that's
Yeah,
yeah,
there's another name for it. I don't think it's Lord Mayor's house. It's whatever the other name is. At any rate, it's within that square mile where the Lord Mayor. It's in London Guildhall. That's where it is. It's in the Guildhall.
that's it. Yeah,
And then Lord Mayor has a parade, a show every year, and they take out these other alternate effigies. And look, they're carrying the pennants of Gog and Magog, and they get paraded around the streets. And I'm sure people think, oh, isn't this all funny and interesting and quirky? And then we go off and
yeah.
go
Look
back
at
to
these
our busy work.
look at these simple, well-meaning hobbits, just
Yeah,
like
yeah,
having a gay
right.
old time, walking
Yeah, yeah,
around with their annual Lord Mayor parade with Gog and Magog there, and
yeah. So now
yeah,
that you've pulled up these images,
yeah,
what ends up giving me like endless goosebumps, in fact, I've got them yet again because um, what Islamic eschatology teaches about Gog and Magog is, once they're released out into the world again, right? Going back to the prophet's nightmare, humans will one day be able to witness and recognize who Gog and Magog are because while the Israelites were twice banished from the Holy Land, for their, for straying from the righteous path, right? First time they ended up in captivity in Babylon at the hands of the Persians. Not the Persians, the Babylonians. There was the Persians that freed them, Cyrus, I think. Second time they rejected Christ, so you're all banished, off you go. You don't get to come back to the Holy Land. But what Islamic eschatology teaches us is that God says only upon the actions of the Gog and Magog people will, against my godly will, the Israelites, the Jews, be returned to the Holy Land. And you get all the way back into the 1850s, late 1800s, the Zionist movement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it was all an idea until the political power of Britain was harnessed. British parliamentarians bought into this thing, saying, to my mind, they found an appeal to this because they said, okay, we recognize the writing's on the wall that the power of the British Empire is in decline. We're not going to be able to maintain this thing. We want to continue our project of world domination. We want to maintain it. We're not going to be able to do it with the Pax Britannica that we created. We haven't been able to retake that rebel colony called the United States. You know what? We can't beat them. Let's join them, subvert them, give ourselves a temporary stepping stone to flesh out, fulfill this project that we're envisioning through this Zionist idea that's come along. So, again, furthering the hijacking of Jewish prophecy, et cetera, for their own, selfish purposes. We're going to work on creating what I call now Pax Judaica, what Islam calls Pax Judaica. And our temporary stepping stone, always intended to be very temporary, was Pax Americana. So this comes back to then, okay, let me finish out the idea of Gog and Magog. So that allows us then to say, Gog and Magog are probably headquartered out of Britain. Doesn't mean that it's the British people, because, I think, one of the biggest pitfalls that we can fall into as we try and understand how the world works is to think in terms of nation states. I think we need to think in terms of factions that transcend political borders. The political borders can be very misleading because then you say, oh, the British are the problem. Well, it's like, what little British farmer out in the Cotswolds is a problem to humanity? He's not part of the problem. The problem exists within that square mile called the City of London. The other thing that Islam teaches us about Gog and Magog is that they multiply prolifically in numbers. And the Bible says it as well. I can't remember exactly how the Bible says it, but in Islam, it's taught as, eventually they become so widespread. It's like trying to count grains of sand on the beach. Impossible, right? You're never going to finish counting all the grains of sand on the beach. So how does Gog and Magog multiply like this? Because I was never approached, you were probably never approached by a Gog and Magog recruiter saying, hey, we're trying to build Pax Judaica here, are you in? And all of us sign up. No, my understanding of how that came to be, how they've enlisted so many of us, and I would include myself as being a foot soldier of Gog and Magog, at least for a period of time, was through this funny money system that they've created. And the world headquarters of the funny money system is really
the
city of London, right?
Yeah. And just to be clear, I don't think we made this point explicit yet, but that Gog and Magog thing that are like, brought about in these effigies every year in this parade with the Lord Mayor of the City of London. Faisal, when you're speaking about the city, you're speaking about the city within the City of London. You're thinking about the thing that's beyond all jurisdiction.
Exactly. I'm not talking about landing at Heathrow Airport and going to visit the Tower Bridge and stuff. I'm talking about that square mile, which is clearly marked out with those iron posts, red, white, and black iron posts. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And Gog and Magog.
That square mile that even the king needs permission to enter.
Yeah, and that the queen or king has to bow down to the Lord Mayor if they enter into that domain. Yeah. And just to be clear as well, these are the protectors, the official protectors of the City of London. That's their official titles. Yes. And on the shield here, I'm not sure if this one is Gog or Magog. I think that one's Magog. Anyway,
Yeah.
the one with the shield,
Okay.
that is featured on it for those who might have good eyesight. Is the phoenix
Hmm.
emerging out of fire?
Right.
That
Yes. Yes.
motif,
Yes.
yeah, you
Yeah.
know when that motif was placed there, right?
Why that motif was placed there?
Yeah, what year and or why? Yeah, do you know why?
Well, I don't know why, but I would say that the reason it's placed there is, because I often call this whole idea of a uh, synthetically created demise of Israel and then its redemption and rebirth. I often call that to help people understand. It's like a phoenix rising out of its own ashes. But you tell me what it really
Yeah,
means.
well, you're right, and it's one of these rituals in occult theology that it's another way of saying order out of chaos, but basically
Right.
it's a spiritual or political alchemy where if you just raise something to the ground, whether an individual psyche or a people or whatever, you can rebuild something new, reconstruct that broken
Right.
down person or
Yeah.
that broken down society out of the ashes. And this is an image of the Great Fire of London that raged for 4 days in the city, which was still pretty much walled off back then. And the city of London was razed mostly in 1666 in the wake of the British Civil War and the British short-lived Republican movement. Coming out of that in 1660 had the restoration of the House of Stuart. Some people want to believe that the House of Stuart is one of the primary bloodlines of the Merovingians that gets at, the stuff you were reading about in the Holy Blood, Holy Grail.
Yeah.
Personally, I think that that's a myth concocted by the oligarchy to perpetuate its own existence.
Hmm.
That's my theory, at least. But
Okay.
anyway, the House of Stuart was restored in 1660 at that point, and right thereafter, with James II, you had the lighting on fire, the arson of this thing, and coming out of that, the city was rebuilt, and a focus was now placed to really transform fully England from basically eliminate any of the residual artifacts of their anti-imperial heritage to just fully purge it and
Yeah.
go full acceleration into the Dutch takeover a few years later, the Rosicrucian formation of the
Yeah.
Invisible College that happened at that same time, probably
Yeah.
orchestrated by these Rosicrucians who
Yeah.
used
Formation of the Bank of England.
yeah, and then the formation of the Bank of England after 1688 and all of that stuff. So it's an interesting idea that on the shield of Magog, you got that imagery that indicates sort of the symbolic moment that the empire of England was really consolidated as an empire with the
Right.
city as the dominant banking center of the world
Yeah.
that then sort of still, I think still you would say probably exist as the
Totally it
dominant
does.
financial influence,
Totally
right?
it does.
Mm.
And I believe that they're trying to do the exact same thing with Israel and with Judaism. Well,
Mm.
Israel the state at a minimum.
So do you think that they want to
Early
raise Israel to the ground in order to rebuild it as the center of a new emporium or something like that? Or
as the center of the new emporium, as the process of redemption of Israel. So what does redemption mean? It means you've done a lot of bad stuff. Now you're going to pay your punishment for it. But God has placed his hand of goodwill or favor on your shoulder and allows you to get reborn but redeemed, right? And I believe that's the process that's been synthetically manifested. Go all the way back to the beginning of the conversation where I had the epiphany that this anti-Semitism is being allowed to run rampant by intent, by design, to get the world to gang up against Israel, because that's part of their Jewish eschatology, is that the war of Gog and Magog, the Great War, comes about when the whole world gangs up against Israel. Now, how are you going to get people to gang up against Israel? Sure, some people really hate Israel. Some people say Jews are the root of all the problem, but I would say the majority of humans out there, it's just like live and let live. They don't care. But how do you attract all the world's eyeballs? You got to do crazy, crazy, mad stuff, and that is exactly what's going on right now. And the guardians against, the gatekeepers against anti-Semitism have stood down. And it is flying like I've never seen it fly in my life. And okay, I'm only 51, but it was unimaginable growing up that we
well,
would ever see this.
Yeah, no, it's there's a certain I mean, you brought this up in your write up, what you observed with the evidence of a bit of like an agreement that was made to go along with a certain script, that you started seeing cracks that indicated to you that a decision had been made when you saw the debate handled in the way it was in 2024 between Biden and Trump.
Right.
And there you
Biden Trump
noticed
debate, right? Yep.
something jarring I noticed too at the time, which was despite all of the and I'm not in any way, I have no firm conclusions about this, but I do acknowledge the anomalies that bothered me and still bother me, which is that it was, treated by the visual handling, even on MSNBC, CNN, um, close-ups on Biden's vapid eyes, his
Yes.
stumbling.
Yeah.
There was no effort made really, even amongst the left whorish media, to make any cover for
Yeah.
Biden, but rather
Yeah.
to accentuate
Yeah.
the embarrassing flaws of this guy's degenerate
Yeah. The
psyche.
cinematics of it all were stark. And it's just a slap in the face of, boom, this is what you're going to think now.
And at that point, too, I was thinking to myself, okay, a deal's been made, an agreement's made. Like there's
Yeah.
something. This is not just happening in an
Yeah.
purely
This is not
organic
organic.
fashion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. And so you got that. You got also like what you mentioned. Elon was brought into Israel. He's brought into the Holocaust Museum. Now you got Grok 4 coming out,
Oh, God.
promoting
Yeah.
all sorts of
Crazy.
pro-Hitler revivalism,
And
and
poor little
it's
Elmo. Poor little
yeah.
Elmo's been part of the whole thing, too.
Although they brought in, so there's definitely a lot of hate. The hate of Israel, the hate of Netanyahu has never been
Yeah.
bigger, and
Right.
Netanyahu couldn't have done bigger service to the cause of Hitler in some ways than what he's just been doing since October 7th. It was bad
Yeah.
before that, but in
Yeah.
some ways he's done more damage to the image of Judaism as an idea and Israel
Yeah.
specifically
Yeah.
than probably all the Nazis combined could have ever have done. And now people
Yeah.
who thought of themselves as being super pro-Israel are actually starting to kind
Yeah.
of wish that it would be blown off the map.
Yeah.
Um, this kind of falls into alignment with what you've been saying too. Do you think that Netanyahu is aware that this is what he's doing, or does he have a different delusional idea of his role in something that he doesn't understand?
That's a hard one to answer. I mean, like, I can't get into the guy's head. If I had to guess, if I had to place a wager on Polymarket, does Netanyahu know what he's doing, or does he believe in what he's doing? Like, I would say that he's been read in to whatever the script is. Thou shalt do it this way because we really need to get people to hate us so that we can move the project along towards our redemption,
Mm.
towards Pax Judaica, towards the arrival of this Messiah, so that we can establish our. I think he's high up enough in the hierarchy. I think he's far from the top, but I think he's high up enough that he gets read into this. I think he knows what's going on.
And he probably thinks that he's protected, his family's probably protected from the fires and repercussions of what this might entail for most of the people who are expecting him to lead them in a certain direction.
I would imagine so because I think anybody who gets roped into as a useful puppet is always given reassurances. I mean, how else are you gonna, right?
Right.
There is a way out for you. There is a way out for you. Trust me. Just, we need you to do our thing, but there is a way out for you. Now, do they get a bullet in the head at the end? Who knows? But
Yeah. Mussolini probably had certain promises before he was hung upside down and
right, right,
and shot.
totally. Like Hitler
Uh,
was, right? I mean, this is not
well,
the
Hitler
first
might have.
time.
I mean, I'm starting to think that he lived out his days till old age in Argentina. That's where my mind's at increasingly.
There's that. But like he was promised. I mean, he was a creation, or I shouldn't say he was a creation. He was raised in status and stature at the hands of Gog and Magog. It was the city of London that built him up, right? And it's like, okay, here's a Yahoo. That's Yahoo enough. He'll probably run with this part of the project, right? And this is why I say the Zionism isn't in service of the Jewish people. It's in service of this Gog and Magog ridiculousness. And these poor Jewish people, I feel sorry for them and sympathetic for them. A lot of them buy into it. Okay, fine. So it makes it hard to be sympathetic sometimes. But I've matured enough as an individual that I can look at Jewish people and say, if only you really understood how used a people you really are throughout history. You know, currently we can witness it all, but like recent history through the whole era of World War II and Hitler, you guys were just used again by this
Yeah.
freaking Gog and Magog bunch of people.
I got something on that point too, just to share again a screen because a friend of mine, Uwe Alschner, did a pretty good deep dive into a comment that I had made because somebody had sent me the painting
Mhm.
that I looked at and I dug into it a little bit and I became quite persuaded that this person was correct. But it's called the Tavistock Hitler connection. And
Mhm.
Uwe, that's him right there. That's his Substack. Never
Okay.
again is now.
Right.
Um, and in it, he wanted to prove see if I was right or wrong in the claim I was making in an interview, where somebody had mentioned to me that there was discovered a trove of paintings by Hitler in a vault in Germany, watercolors, in
Mhm.
like 1945, right after the war was over,
Mhm.
featuring a dude sitting on a very peculiar bridge, of which there are no two bridges like this in the world. And sure
Mhm.
enough, when you actually look at the bridge
Oh wow.
itself, it exists in Exeter, just a short walk from Tavistock.
Jesus.
Uh, it's very close to Tavistock, and rock for rock, this is the bridge which Hitler
Wow.
features himself sitting over a red body of water. I'm assuming that that's
Yeah.
water.
Yeah.
The problem here is that it's dated 1912. So it would have put
Wow.
Hitler as a young man, even before World War One had been launched,
Holy
in
crap.
England, a stone's throw away from Tavistock, which, as he points out, is
Um,
the town of Tavistock, which is the center
yeah.
of
Yeah.
what the Tavistock Institute became
Yeah.
later on.
Yeah.
It
Oh
was
my
historically
goodness.
owned by the Russell dynasty since John Russell, first Earl of Bedford, and was
Okay.
endowed with the property of Tavistock Abbey after its destruction under Henry VIII. Lord Bertrand Russell, third Earl Russell and direct descendant of John Russell, the eugenicist, and Fabian,
Yeah.
um, literally was the owner of this when Hitler was there.
On
So,
real.
yeah. When we say that Hitler was a British stooge, it wasn't just because he was getting funding and logistical and
Yeah.
financial support from
There's way
Bank of
more to it,
England,
eh?
and it
Crazy.
goes even deeper than that even. And
Crazy.
last thing I'll say on the Phoenix thing, the first 20th century use of the term Operation Phoenix wasn't the
Uh-huh.
Vietnam War, which was run by a bunch of Crowleyite Satanists like Michael
Yeah.
Aquino.
Yeah.
Before that, and my wife did a documentary actually going through a lot of this when she heard Brett Weinstein, the
Uh-huh.
intellectual dark web guy, calling
Yeah. Yeah.
for
Yeah. Yeah.
a
Yeah.
phoenixing of the Republic at the Save America rally right before the elections. So he was like, he was telling all of these people that we have to, if we want to save the Republic, we have to phoenix it. He said it like three times over, and it got my wife's attention because she's been really looking at this
Yeah.
stuff as well. And she found out that first reference of the phoenixing operation in the 20th century was actually Tavistock in the 1930s, which on their Wikipedia page, it talks about John Rawlings Rees's Phoenix operation that he carried out to eliminate any claims to therapeutic purpose within Tavistock in the 20s when it was
Yeah.
originally created. There was still some idea of
Yeah.
psychiatrists trying to heal people, and he
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
overhauled it to make sure that everyone who was permitted to work in Tavistock was on the same page that the
Yeah.
purpose is social engineering and creating a new humanity
Right.
liberated from ideas of God and family and nation, right, which he said was the cause of all psychological
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
neurosis. So it's just so interesting that all of his stuff kind of like fits right into that imagery we've just seen with the city of London initiated by the
Yeah.
phoenixing of Magog
Yeah.
situation, and then how that plays into the type of fires that are being planned right now,
Yeah.
ritualistic, that could result in many
Yeah.
people being burned. But now the
Yeah.
question is, who is you? You make a point. I don't know if you want to say anything to that, but I also am
Yeah.
curious to get your idea of Russia in this before we. I know we only have like 10 minutes left, so
Yeah.
maybe to pull together some of your thoughts in the
Yeah.
current day and age. So if you want to speak to anything I just said, go for it. Or if you
Sure.
want to also speak about your idea of Russia's role and Putin's role within your eschatology,
Yep.
now's the time.
So yeah. So why don't we hit on Putin? So we talked about Zulkarnain, second iteration of a certain type of character. I believe, as Sheikh Imran Hussein has sort of deduced, that we're probably looking at Putin as the second Zulkarnain, because if anyone is rising to power in the region of the Black Sea on a foundation of great faith in the one true God, who is working to relieve those who are being oppressed by Gog and Magog, and who is not, what is not Gog and Magog's war dog if not NATO, right? So go back to what I illustrated about Gog and Magog, who they might be. It's the U.S. is part of it, Britain is part of it, et cetera, et cetera. The Western civilization really is by and large Gog and Magog, but they've got branch offices everywhere now because of the funny money system that's been created to enlist people into their cause. NATO. So who's working against NATO, trying to contain and combat them? And it's the only character, if we are truly in this end times era, we have to try and identify a guy, and Putin sort of kind of fits the bill. So that's where I think we are with Putin. He's not going to kill off Gog and Magog. He's not going to destroy them. He's going to contain them and checkmate them. Who might the decoy of the false messiah be? Why did that Biden-Trump debate resonate with me so much? Because I had this idea that there needed to be a decoy of a false messiah. Lo and behold, you've got this Trump figure who looks like some deal was done. And I said, forget about Biden, forget about the Democrats. Is it going to be Kamala? Is it going to be Michelle Obama? Is it going to be Gavin Newsom? The debates were running like crazy. Who's going to replace the guy? I said, it doesn't matter. Tune in on November 5th. I guarantee you Trump's going to win this thing. Lo and behold, Trump wins this thing. I said his victory is ordained, as will be his failure within his 4-year presidency. He has to fail. Why does he have to fail? You go back to the Messiah ben Joseph story. You go back to the idea that the false Messiah comes as someone who promises all sorts of wonderful, great things, and everybody gets excited about him, but he turns out to be evil and wrong, right, about everything. So that's why I turn to Trump and say, well, he's probably the decoy that's being set up for us, such that when he fails, once war rips through the Middle East and perhaps around the world even, God forbid, but if it does, that is going to be the thing that forces Israel through its crucible of purification, as it were, in order for something to be conjured up and put in front of us and said, hey, guess what? Look, your Messiah, you're waiting for your Messiah. Guess you were right. It's Jesus. He's going to declare himself falsely to be Jesus. And then we get into this era of Pax Judaica, which, I mean, there's a lot more to talk about this, because I said the Antichrist is a figure that goes through 3 phases before he appears before us. Those 3 phases are Pax Britannica, Pax America, Pax Judaica. That's the way, I interpret and understand from Islamic eschatology. I agree with what the Sheikh Imran Hussein has to say. It makes an abundance of sense to me. But I don't think we have enough time for all of that today.
Well, but I think that this is good. And as far as just introducing a hypothesis and interpretation, and it's important for people to, I think, pay more attention to this way of thinking, whether you agree or disagree. There's a number of things I just want to point out, for people listening, what Faisal, what I am saying, what we're triangulating in on as hypotheses are just that. They're hypotheses, they're interpretations that have no claim to being the absolute truth. However, they are educated. They're informed by a variety of serious data points that are too often overlooked. And I think it's just good to get into that exercise, because frankly, there's Hindu eschatology, there's various types of Buddhist eschatology. There is, as you pointed out, Jewish and subcurrents within each one of Christian and Jewish and Muslim eschatology, within the Sunnis, within the Ismailis, within the Shia, within the various Sufi groups that overlap, and
don't forget the Zoroastrians.
And you got existent Zoroastrians and esoteric Zoroastrians and esoteric Buddhists, and then you got so there's a whole variety of things. The point being is they're touching on something that should be worked on, chewed on, and processed if we're going to be able to have more context when we go into an interpretation of the events that are shaping the history that we ourselves are living in. So in that sense, I highly value just this little dialogue that we had back and forth in the sharing. The other question I had right before we phase out of this
Yep.
interview is the Twelvers in Shia Twelver Islam. There's the idea of the avatar or the reincarnation of the 12th Imam, who will emerge as the Al Mahdi and will work with
Yeah.
Jesus or Isa.
Yep.
What role does that figure play, or if any, in your considerations? And who might that be
Yes.
if you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so I've heard a lot of evangelical Christians misinterpret or mislabel the Mahdi, Imam al-Mahdi, as the Messiah of Islam. The Messiah of Islam is the one true Jesus Christ, the same Christ that those
Right.
Israelites followed to become Christians. It is one and the same person, exactly the same individual. And I really wish we could just get rid of this idea of that the Imam is an Islamic Messiah. He is a figure that emerges. He doesn't return. He's not like a reincarnation. This is
Sure.
my understanding. The Twelvers might disagree with me, but he is an individual that is emerges as a leader of the Muslim world. He helps the Muslims get past all their stupidity of, subscribing to the playbook of Gog and Magog. Wrenches us free of the grasp of Gog and Magog, gets us to get past our petty differences, our sectarianism, unites the Muslim world, and under a united banner, able to at least mount a cause against this Pax Judaica thing. So, in the grand sequence of eschatology, the chronology of it, Islam says you got the Great War. From the Great War comes the emergence of Pax Judaica. Some argue that Pax Judaica already exists, but whatever. Okay, there's not an official flag planted in the ground, so I'm holding off. But Pax Judaica comes out of the Great War. After the Great War, you get an army of authentic Muslims that arise out of the east, out of Khorasan. Khorasan is largely Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran. Parts of it, you'd have to go and look up an old map. They emerge, they're sort of unstoppable. They march on Constantinople and, well, Istanbul. An authentic Muslim army retakes Istanbul, retakes Constantinople, rights the wrongs of Sultan Mehmed II of the Ottomans, because that was a totally un-Islamic, unholy exercise that the Ottomans undertook, and I can explain that at another time maybe. Right those wrongs, return the Hagia Sophia to the Orthodox Church. This idiot Erdogan turned it back into a bloody mosque. At least it was a museum for the longest time, but he turned it back into a mosque, which is total sin and evil. That exercise of returning the Hagia Sophia to the Orthodox Church should really, really cement the deep alliance of love and affection between Eastern Orthodox Christianity and Islam. In my understanding, just exercising some logic and rationality, Constantinople will then be left to the Russians. They can enjoy having their church back. But that alliance then allows for the reopening of the Bosphorus. What do you mean reopening? Well, that means it has to be closed, and that's part of my thesis as well. We can talk about it another time. But closed because you got to prevent the Russians from being able to exit out of the Black Sea into the Mediterranean. So anyways, the Bosphorus gets reopened. The Russians get themselves free passage into the Mediterranean. That army that retakes Constantinople, I believe, retreats out of Constantinople, descends back south, and flanks Israel, Greater Israel, Jerusalem, however you want to frame it for yourself, from the north, south,
Right.
and the east. You've got the Russians on the western flank on the Mediterranean with their navy, and now you've contained this thing. But what happens as soon as Constantinople is marched upon and liberated, you get these Gog and Magog people are like, and the Antichrist himself is like, oh crap, this Pax Judea could fall apart if we allow this to happen. That is when the Antichrist emerges, only after the fall of Constantinople and the return of Constantinople into Russian hands. The Antichrist emerges. the Imam al-Mahdi emerges, and then Armageddon actually happens. Not the Great War, but the real Armageddon, where et cetera, et cetera. Anyways, we've run out of time, but we can get into all of that juicy detail later on. I rambled through it really quickly. The audience is probably going, what the what? What is this guy on about? Yeah, there's a lot.
I think this is constructive. It was good. I thank you very much for taking the time, and I appreciate this dipping of the toes into water, which many people are uncomfortable swimming in. But I think it's useful to at least start dipping the toes in. And I have a lot of questions, and I still do. So maybe we'll might pick this up either in private or in another follow recording. In the coming days or weeks ahead, and I look forward to continue to pull on these threads. It's very interesting stuff, man, and we're living through very interesting times, to say the least.
Absolutely, yeah.
So totally. Till next time, man.
Thanks for having me on. It's an absolute pleasure, and happy to talk again.